Oh, the garbage truck's just outside, I think. Okay. Just hold. I don't think my editing's good enough to get rid of that sound, so. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Nadine and you can find me at yourknittingbestie on Instagram, on Ravelry and here on YouTube. If you're a new viewer, then this is just a place where I talk about my obsession with knitting and what it's like to be a knitter here in Australia, in particular in Brisbane, where it is generally pretty warm. So if you're a viewer from Australia, then I think this will be particularly relevant to you because I'll be talking about stores that you could shop from, yarn that you could definitely use, and patterns that might be appropriate in our climate. And if you're from overseas or somewhere that's a bit more cooler, a bit more appropriate for knitwear, then there'll still be something for you because I often knit for air conditioning. So I do knit warmer projects for cooler weather as well. So you might be thinking that January is a bit of an odd time to be thinking about gifts for 2024, and I admit that is probably the case. But I really want to start thinking about gift knits much earlier this year because it is always such a rush towards the end of the year to get everything ready for Christmas. And I would like to try my best to start knitting much earlier this year. It also, I think, might line up with some intentions for 2024. So I think from when I watch videos and just looking at things online, it looks like a lot of people have an intention or a goal of getting through some of their stash. And I think knitting gifts for people is a wonderful way to get through your stash because there are a lot of kind of one skein projects which you can use to kind of dwindle that supply, which is always good, I think. So that's what I'm going to try and do. I'm going to try and just have a gift knit on the needles, perhaps off to the side, that I'll pick up on and off throughout the year in the hopes that I'm not as stressed going into Christmas. Actually, before we jump into the content of the video, I thought I should quickly tell you what I'm wearing. So this is a pattern that I self-drafted and it's using the Fyberspates, what is it? Fyberspates Vivacious 4-ply. And I'll put the color on screen because I have forgotten. But this was a really fun item to draft up. It has a double folded neckband and then I bound off here for the shoulders and then did some increases at the front and back with a garter panel which then joins up at the sides. And it was a really fun process. I actually ended up grading this whole pattern for a whole range of sizes just for fun to see if I could figure out the maths. So that was really cool. And one of the reasons why I'm excited to try another self-drafted project this year, as I mentioned in my last 2024 knitting intentions video, I ran into some trouble actually because I was so excited to jump into drafting the pattern that I didn't read the label properly and didn't realize that this is superwash yarn. So I knit the project up just kind of by sight and by trying it on, and then of course I blocked it and it grew incredibly. So you might be able to see the armholes are way too deep for what they should be, and I actually knitted the item again, I think twice, to refine it a bit further into a more fitted crop top with appropriate armhole depth. I might just jump into the first gift knit which I wanted to talk about. So it's actually the only object that I have here with me today. It is the Antler Toque by Tin Can Knits, which is a free pattern, which is wonderful. I've actually knit the matching cardigan, the Antler cardigan, in the same yarn that I used to knit the hat. And I really enjoyed making both of those objects. So I've got it here. This is the finished object. So I knit this in a yarn which is very popular here in Australia. It's kind of a yarn that everyone, I think, has used or should use if you haven't already. It's from Bendigo Woolen Mills, and it is their luxury 10-ply yarn, which is 100% wool, and it is extremely affordable. So it's a great option to use for projects here in Australia. This yarn comes in 200-gram bowls, so they come in these massive, massive bowls. And I should say this is in the colour Stone, which is the same colour that I used for the cardigan. And it was, I think, the perfect yarn for this project because it was a bit thicker. So I've just got some notes here, double check. So the pattern called for worsted weight yarn, which is an 18 stitch gauge, and this yarn came out at 19 stitches on a 5mm needle. So I figured maybe this isn't very good, but I figured that was close enough actually, and I just went ahead and did the pattern. I knit the adult large because the recipient of this gift, I was told, likes a nice big beanie to cover his ears completely. So I decided that that would be okay, and if because of the gauge it was a little bit smaller than the pattern, then that was probably okay, given that I read that the adult large was actually quite large when I was checking the projects on Ravelry. So I'm pretty happy with how this came out. I did end up doing one less pattern repeat of the cables because I got to, I think it's around here or so that you start doing the decreases, and I thought that was actually looking about right already in terms of sizing. So I'm happy I made that decision because I had my partner try it on and it looks like it fits pretty well. It's a nice and long around here, so it'll definitely cover the ears, I think. And because it's a nice thick yarn, I'm hoping it'll be nice and warm because this one is actually getting sent off to Canada for one of my uncles. So I'm very pleased with how it came out. I would absolutely use that yarn again for any of the Antler patterns by Tin Can Knits. And yeah, I'm very happy with how that one came along. Looks nice on the camera, doesn't it? Nice and neat. I will say blocking really makes a difference for this pattern and the Antler cardigan. I guess that's just the way it is with any sort of cable pattern. It's always nice to relax the stitches so that it kind of lies flat and just kind of becomes its full self. Okay, so that's the first one. And I'll, if I don't remember, I'll put it on afterwards when I edit it. But I want to make sure that I say where I got the yarn from and how much it was. Because one of the things I find difficult when choosing patterns is finding yarn, like actually sourcing the yarn that should go well with the project. And just finding good yarn here in Australia, I think is a little bit, or my perception is that it's a little bit more difficult than it might be overseas, where knitting and fibre arts are a little bit more popular than they are here. Okay, so that's the first one done. So on the theme of hats, the next project that I finished for my gift knitting was a hipster hat by Petite Knit, which I knit for my dad. I thought this was a great pattern. It's very easy to read, and it turns into a really, really polished object that I think looks very modern and is easy to wear by a lot of people. This is actually my third time knitting this pattern, so I think one of the great things about purchased hat patterns is that you can get a lot of use out of them. it's something that you can kind of keep in your library and keep going back to. Maybe this is some knitter math, but I always think that if you knit a pattern more than once, then the cost of the pattern comes down. So instead of being a $10 pattern, it's instead a $3 pattern or something like that, depending on how often you knit the pattern. So I used some stash yarn for this project. I actually used the Sanders Garn Double Sunday in the colours Almond and Into the Woods. So the almond is the lighter colour and Into the Woods is this kind of dark green colour, which was lovely to use. So I'd previously knit a hat in almond and a separate hat in Into the Woods. And this one I knit for my dad. I did a two-tone project. So I just kind of used first the Into the Woods, which I thought would be nice for the brim, the darker colour that you kind of see around the head there when you look at someone head on when they're wearing it. And then for the top, I used the almond colour. And it actually came out really well, I think. I was a little worried about where the color change happened, if that would look neat enough and where it would sit on the hat. But I managed to do it so that the color change happened right at the top of where the brim was folded up. So it worked out pretty well, I think. And I think my dad was happy with it. I'll tell you the size. Actually, let me quickly open it here so I can tell you the details. Yes, okay, so I knit the size man, which was appropriate, I guess, for my dad. And I used 3.5mm needles. This project was actually super special because I knit it up while I went on a bit of a road trip with some family from Canada who had come over for my sister's wedding last year. And so it was a quick knit, and I did it in the car as we drove up to the Great Barrier Reef, the southern part. And there was some excellent, good Australian scenery on the way up there with kind of the really deep red coloured earth on the sides of the road, some beautiful beach scenery. And then when we went out, we did some snorkeling out around Lady Musgrave Island, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful time. So thinking of that project brings me a lot of joy because it reminds me of a great time, and I hope that my dad will have the same memories when he looks at that hat. So that's definitely something that I would knit again as a holiday gift. And I think I probably will be knitting more hats in my future because my sister's now husband really loves to wear my hand knitted hats. He calls them, so my name's Nadine, he calls them Deanie Beanies, which I think is fantastic. And he really likes them because he shaves his head. So in the air conditioned in his office and in the cooler months here in Australia, his head gets a bit cold. So there's actually a genuine need for knitted items for him, and I love making them for him. So I might venture into some different hat patterns throughout the year, but I do really like the Hipster Hat as a good, solid hat that will be liked, I think, by pretty much everyone who wears it. And I should mention where I got the yarn. I got it from a place called the Yarn Ball, which is located fairly close to me here, but not close enough that I could drive there. It's probably about an hour drive. So I did still have it shipped, but it came very quickly, and they have a wonderful selection of yarn there, including the Sanders Garn yarn, which can be difficult to find here in Australia. So I was super pleased to see it on their website. So I have a steady supply of more of that yarn if I were to use it. I was really happy with the quality of the yarn, and it was just a very good experience to use it, and a bit of a novel experience to be able to use the exact yarn that the pattern calls for, because I think I might have mentioned it can be difficult to source the correct yarn here in Australia because it's just a little bit more difficult to come by. Rightio, so then the next pattern that I knit up for a gift knit was a pair of socks. And I mentioned in my first video that one of my intentions for 2024 is to get much better at knitting socks. And that's because I would like to keep a particular person who I adore. I would like to keep him in a good supply of Christmas socks for the indefinite future. And I'd really like for those socks to fit really well and to be a really good quality yarn so that he can get a lot of use out of them. I think he wears them as bed socks, so they don't get that everyday wear, you know, the friction in shoes and everything like that, which I think helps preserve them a little bit. But he did wear one of the pairs to death, so it's a good reason to invest the time in learning how to do it well. So the pair of socks that I made for him for last Christmas was using the I'm So Basic pattern by Summer Lee Knits, which is a free pattern and I believe also has a YouTube video to go along with that pattern, which I used as someone who's still trying to get their head around knitting socks. And I found it to be an excellent resource for someone who's kind of just starting out or not super comfortable with knitting socks. It was wonderful. I did actually buy a new set of knitting needles to knit socks for this project, which I thought might make a bit of a difference, and it absolutely did. So I'll show you the set that I got. It was really funny actually because I ordered it online and I've bought 2 other sets of interchangeable knitting needles over the course of my knitting career. So I was expecting something like this to arrive, you know, about this size. And when it arrived in the mail, this is the size. Isn't this? It was so cute. I had a great time when it arrived in the office and I went around showing everyone saying, "Oh my gosh, look at these tiny little needles that I just got." And I couldn't get over how small they are. Which, you know, if I'd thought about it, would make total sense because I know that socks are a very small circumference and gauge. But yeah, look at how small they are. I think they come in, for each size, there's one smaller and one larger. So I think the larger might be 3 millimeters and the smaller is, 3 inches, and the smaller is 2 inches. And I kind of got these and I was like, early thought, this is like knitting with toothpicks. I definitely still think that. But they're super fun to use and they really do take a little bit of getting used to. So I found that using I think all up it was 9 inches, a circular. So to make the knitting experience a little bit easier, because I found it very fiddly at the beginning, I would put the slightly larger needle in my working hand that I'm using to pick the yarn, and the smaller needle size in my left hand, which just stays exactly the same. So in that way, I had a slightly bigger needle to help me control the actual knitting, which I think made the process a lot easier. And it produced a beautiful fabric. So I'll talk a little bit about the yarn. I did a little bit of research into sock yarn to try and find a good quality yarn that would last for a little while. And I ended up going with the Regia 4-ply yarn, which I bought from Morris & Sons just through their online store. I believe they're located down in Sydney. And they had a really good selection of the Regia sock yarn. And the thing that drew me to that yarn is the fact that it has the pattern that just emerges from the yarn as you knit. And it's not even just a self-striping pattern. It's more intricate than that. It looks even more detailed. So I was very excited to try that, but I have to admit I had a little bit of trouble at first getting the pattern to come out correctly. Um, and it was a little bit of a little bit of a first world problem that I very much enjoyed having, because I sat there and I was knitting up the project, and you could see that there was supposed to be, for example, one ring of color, and it wouldn't quite connect at one point. So there'd be a bit of a gap, and then the next color would start and then finish even earlier. So I could tell that the number of stitches I was using wasn't quite right for the pattern to come out. And I sat with this for a couple of days, and I kind of luxuriated over having this really low stakes problem to solve. You know, do I rip out the project and start again in the hopes that I use a smaller stitch count and maybe the pattern comes out better? Or do I just keep going, because at that point Christmas was approaching, and you know, maybe it isn't actually supposed to come out perfectly. Maybe it's just, you know, maybe it just uses different colors and from a distance it still looks beautiful with the different color changes. So I sat with it for a little while, and because I am a smidge neurotic, I ended up pulling it out and starting again. And I actually was really happy that I did. So at the when I first cast on the project, I was using the large size from the I'm So Basic socks, and that was, I think, 70 something stitches, low 70s. And I really struggled to find what I thought would be a good number of stitches to cast on. And I ended up watching the Arne and Carlos videos, because of course they've put out their perfect socks with Regia. And in their videos, they explain that you should cast on 64 stitches, regardless of what size you're making, to make sure that the pattern emerges. So I thought I would give 64 stitches a try and see if that helped with the pattern. And it absolutely did help. So I think I was using a US 2, so a 2, what was it? A 2.75 millimeter needle, and the 64 stitches, and the pattern came out much better. I'll put a photo up so that you can hopefully see the difference in the pattern. So it was otherwise a really enjoyable knit. I got to the heel and I was still it still felt a little clumsy to be using the smaller needles with the small circumference yarn to knit in a, you know, in the round. So I ended up just doing a straight stockinette heel instead of the slip stitch heel, which is called for in the I'm So Basic pattern. And that turned out fine still. And so even though I used a slightly different number of stitches, I just kind of followed the pattern loosely in terms of measurements and guidance on how to do the heel and turn and the gusset and all of that sort of thing. And it came together well, I think. So I hope that that was a good present for Peter, and I'm looking forward to doing another pair of socks for him, which I think I'll try and do earlier in the year, so that I can make sure that it is ready and a good fit for Christmas this year. And I also think that doing socks is just a great gift year round, even for birthdays, you know, things like that that you might need a gift for. So I'm very pleased to continue on my knitting journey, my knitting socks journey, but I think I do need to get a long cable so that I can knit the socks with the magic loop method instead of in the round on the 9-inch circular. And that is just because I found that after knitting the both of the socks, I had some pain in my wrist, and that could be because I was trying to get used to it and uncomfortable, so I might have been holding the needles a little bit too tight, which I know isn't good for the ergonomics of knitting. But I think it's also just that tiny circumference, it's just really difficult to manage. So I'm hoping, I think I'm going to go ahead and order a longer needle, a longer cable that'll fit with this needle size, and give a go at Magic Loop and see if that helps with the wrist pain. So finally, I did a series of Sophie Scarves, and I think this pattern needs no introduction. It is everywhere in the knitting world, I think, and it's constantly on the top page in Ravelry. So I think, yeah, I think everyone knows and has probably already knit a Sophie scarf. And I have to say, it is a wonderful process knit to have on your needles. For some reason, I resisted buying the pattern for a little while. I think because it was so popular and it seemed like a straightforward sort of knit. But once I decided to go ahead and buy the pattern, I was very happy I did because I had one on my needles for a really long time. And it was a really good way to use my stash yarn. So I think I ended up knitting, was it three Sophie scarves for my Canadian relatives so that I could give them to them when they were here in Australia for my sister's wedding. And I'll pop up some details if I can, or some photos of those scarves. I don't think I have too many good photos because it was before I had decided to start this channel and properly start documenting my knits. But they came out really well, and I really, really liked getting through some bits and bobs in my stash. So I think that's another great way to use your gift knitting to use your stash. But I have to say, after having knit so many Sophie scarves, I'm interested to find a similar pattern. So perhaps, you know, still a small scarf, but I want to try a different technique, a different pattern to get a similar object. So I was thinking I might do a video with a roundup of Sophie scarf alternatives. So look out for that one in the future. And then finally, I did a scarf number 1 from My Favorite Things Knitwear, which is kind of that iconic little bandana shape, which I think would be very good to wear with a winter coat because it would kind of just cover that little triangle of space where, like in the chest area here when you do up your coat. In Australia, it's a little bit more difficult to wear. It's a bit more of a fashion item, I think, that maybe Australians aren't used to seeing. I actually wore and the same goes for the Sophie scarf, to be honest. I wore one of my Sophie scarves into the office once, and one of the guys I work with came up to me and was like, "Nadine, have you got a sock tied around your neck?" So perhaps it's something that people aren't used to seeing here, but I understand they're very popular overseas and that as a knitter you can see them out in the wild all the time. Is that the case? Is that your experience of the Sophie scarf, or is it something that just kind of knitters go wild for, but everyone else is just kind of like, eh? I'm interested to know. So it would be great to know if you have knit any similar patterns for your gift knitting. Are you also hoping to get started much earlier this year? And is there any particular pattern that you think is the ideal gift knit pattern? I would love to know so that I can put it on my list and get started early. I'm really hoping to get started much earlier this year. Okay, so that is the end of this video. The next video I put up, I think, will be more of a dive into my whips, with the things I have on my needles at the moment that are making me really excited to finish up. So thank you so much for joining me for another video. If you liked the video, it would be wonderful if you would hit like. And if you really wanted to make my day, you could subscribe to the channel so that you see the next video that comes out. So thanks again for coming to hang out for a little while, and I will see you in the next video.